Testament justification for this concept of purgatory, whether we want to use the word purgatory or not, just this idea that something happens after death before one goes to heaven, if that is God's will. Right?
So remember that question? Where do you find purgatory in the Bible? This is going to talk about that.
Just briefly, based upon some of the early church fathers and their understanding of it. I want to just get that into from current slide. There we go. All right, so it's a bigger screen. So in Daniel 12:10, many will be purified, made white, and refined. The wicked will act wickedly, and none of the wicked will understand, but the wise will understand. So that idea was understood as that there's some process of being purified. Right? Whatever that looks like, obviously we don't know, but this is the Old Testament sort of like prefiguring of that concept. Also in Zechariah 13:9, in the whole land, says the Lord, 2/3 shall be cut off and perish, and 1/3 shall be left alive. And I will put this third into the fire. So that's where the theme of fire, right, as sort of a metaphor. I don't think it's an actual fire, but I'm not, who might say that. But in any case, refine them as one refines silver, and test them as gold is tested. So why gold and silver? Because they're perfect, right, metals, precious. They will call on my name, and I will answer them. I will say they are my people, and they will say the Lord is our God. And then, of course, from Second Maccabees, which the Catholics keep, right, in our Bible, but he presumed that a beautiful reward awaits believers who lie down in death, so his anxiety was holy and in accordance with the faith. He therefore ordered this sacrifice of atonement to be offered for the dead, so they might be free from their sins. That justifies praying for the dead, prayers for the deceased. All right, so the combination of those from the Old Testament, suggests this concept of purgatory, and also, why is that advancing?
I advanced it.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
No, that's okay.
I go back if you want.
No, that's all right. And then Maccabees with the justification for the prayers for the deceased. So then from the New Testament, we have the Gospel of Matthew. Anyone who speaks a word against the Son of Man will be forgiven, but whoever speaks against the Holy Spirit will not be forgiven, either in this world or the next. So that implies that something in the next, right? There's a possibility of being forgiven, except for blasphemy against the Holy Spirit. And then in 1 Corinthians, I think, which was alluded to already, one day everyone's work will be seen. It will be made public on the day of judgment, when everything is tested by fire. So there we get, again, with the theme of fire. The fire then will test each person's work. So if what you have built withstands the fire, you will be rewarded.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I want to go back one. Yeah, they need this.
Oh, okay.
2 Maccabees 12, 45, 46. Did you get that one?
Right.
I mean, I could give you this PowerPoint to share with everyone.
Or it's going to be on YouTube. So.
Okay.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I'm just, like I said, I'm reading fast because I'm trying to get it in before that happens. So Corinthians. If what you have built withstands the fire, you will be rewarded. But if the work turns to ashes, the worker will have to pay. He will be saved, but not without passing through the fire. And why I highlighted these passages too, because when we look at some of the early images representing the concept of purgatory, you're going to see like these little doll-like figures, presumably engulfed in flames, but it's not meant to harm them. It's meant to somehow visualize these concepts here. And then, of course, in Revelation, nothing defiled shall enter, which then implies that there will be a process of purifying. All right, some of the early church fathers and writers like Tertullian, once again, justifying prayers for the deceased. By the year 211, Tertullian is telling us we offer sacrifices for the dead. So in other words, this was common practice, right? So the understanding that there was this state of existence, which we call purgatory, but one should pray for the deceased. By 307, we have the righteous whose sins remain will be drawn to the fire. Once again, right? That topos of fire. Then John Chrysostom, we must not doubt that our offerings for the dead bring them a certain comfort. And then by the 6th century, St. Gregory the Great, with regard to the certain minor faults, it is necessary to believe that before the judgment there exists a purifying fire. So there you have sort of the early church period also. And it was pretty much universal in terms of the belief.
And so remember when Jesus taught in parables, he often used the surrounding area. You know, he talked about the birds and the bees, and he talked about the weeds and the wheat, because those were things that were easily accessible, that people could connect to. Fire is that same thing, you know, when we talk about, you know, our souls and what happens. People could connect to that pure, because they knew what it was like to purify gold and silver. They knew that process. So I think that's why fire probably jumps in there. So.
Well, because it's mentioned in Scripture, but also they could relate to that.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Copulation, and I'll talk about that process of separating the impurities from gold. So I guess we can move on. So what I thought might be interesting first is to help you understand the difference between hell and purgatory in art. So I just put 2 images up there, and I think you could see the difference. But if not, we could help explain it. So which is which, do you think? Right? It's pretty obvious, right? Although sometimes we have to realize that there are some representations of purgatory where it looks as though the little souls are being tortured, but it's not necessarily that they're being tortured, it's rather that they are being purified of whatever sin, that venial sin that we just sort of went through and Deacon Denny's presentation part. So the one on your left is a detail from a missal. And some of the earliest scenes representing the concept of purgatory appear in the missal. And it makes sense, right? Because the missal includes the prayers for the dead, right? The votive masses. And on your right is obviously a scene of hell, where there's this satanic-looking figure devouring the little souls. And if you look around, there's other little demons torturing. Right? So that's how you know the difference. And generally, the hell scene will often be in the context of a last judgment or an illustration representing St. Augustine's City of God and his explanation of that judgment. So that was just, again, to help us understand. If you could go forward on this.
Just a comment. So
sure. There
there was a question, do we suffer in purgatory? Okay, that was one of your questions.
There you go.
Okay?
Good.
So, yes, we do suffer in purgatory, but it's not like this. These souls are being boiled in water. Oh my God, how painful that must be.
Yeah.
The pain that we suffer in purgatory is just because we long to be in the presence of God. You know, that's the pain and suffering that exists there. It's not the physical pain like we will experience, you know, when souls are condemned, you know, to hell. Okay.
So I'm going to continue with this. So in the image on the left, there's a rubric translated and transcribed in commemoration of the deceased, right? And that's what's in red there, in commemorazione defunctus, so the mass for the deceased. And then traditionally it was a prayer, an antiphon at Vespers. So the little AD in the lower left-hand corner, at Vespers, an antiphon, placebo domini in regione vivorium, or something like that, which is based on a psalm, I think, 114 from the Vulgate, 116 from the Common, just saying, it pleases me to worship God in the land of the living, right? Vaguely translated from that. I got to pressure on that. But if you notice that there's these little doll-like figures, and notice the position of their bodies and where their line of vision is. Looking upward, right, to heaven, and the angels assisting them. So angels as intercessors is part of that understanding, right, that the angels will escort us to God, God's messengers, and it makes sense. Down below, it looks almost like an earthly realm, right? It almost looks like sometimes like an orb. And you'll see you'll see land, you'll see bodies of water. And water, too, is a symbolic of purifying, like a baptismal purification. And of course the flames of fire. And notice the flames of fire are not consuming them or harming them. It's this idea that they're undergoing a ritual of purification by fire, like the way in which gold or silver is refined in the process known as cupellation. So in cupellation, you use a bowl made of bone ash, and the molten silver or gold is in there. The impurities of the gold, like lead, is absorbed by the cupel, right, meaning the bowl, and it leaves the pure gold left behind, right? So that's the idea here. So that concept of a purification through fire to remove the impurities and make pure the rest. That's what's trying to be communicated through that little representation.
What century is that?
This dates to probably the 14th century. right? So it was very typical to have an illustration like that within, say, like a missal. Because then the missal is divided up into sections, right? So you have the calendar, you have the temporale, the sanctorale, the common of the saints. But then you would have a section with like votive masses, and the masses read for the deceased. And it would be quick reference, right? Because the person using the missal would be literate to read, but to quickly get to the section about the mass for the deceased, right? Especially if you think about November, right? The time of year when, like November 1st, we would have the All Souls.
All Saints, yeah.
Right. So that would have been the original context for it. And I had that information in slides to come, but I figured just say it now since you asked. So, and you'll see that that type of representation becomes very common, where you see these little doll-like figures in very prayerful positions looking upward, not necessarily being tortured, and angels acting as intercessors in the context of a missal or prayer book. After the Counter-Reformation, it changes, and I figured I'd wait that for part 2, right, to show the difference. So you can advance forward. I think I just have some more examples that illustrate missals. I think the first one after this is that. Oh, you have another question?
What I'm trying to say is, I don't think we have to be afraid, you know, of being in purgatory. You know, look at the joy on their faces, you know, versus what's on the
Exactly, the body language. Yeah, I mean, I have details to show you more about the hell, the scenes from hell that make it
step on you, but
more. No, go ahead. I mean, sometimes you raise things that I just assume people are looking at, but if they don't, there are more scenes of hell, right? So that's what I'm saying. And you see the faces, right? They look distraught. They look like they're in pain and agony because that's what's meant to be communicated. And you have these little like legions of Satan. I don't know who they are actually, but it corresponds to St. Augustine's The City of God, right? It's book 22. And even this idea that a demonic figure with these hideous jaws consume the little souls, and then they're somehow inside, and you can see the body of the satanic figure has what looks like eyes and nostrils, and then an opening that gives you a view. Now, in some other scenes, you actually see that satanic figure defecating the little souls into a bottomless pit, pooping them out, so to speak. You know. But you can see all the different, and often the way in which it was represented at this time, this dates to the middle of the 15th century. Right? Even though it's based upon Augustine's book, which was much earlier, right, in the 5th century. But sometimes the scenes of hell and the torture that's going on references Dante's Divine Comedy as it's described in Inferno. So we have to be careful there. One is poetic, right? And so sometimes you'll see that popping up. But that work, as poetic as it is, unfortunately has misrepresented concepts of hell and purgatory, at least from my understanding of it. But that just gives you an idea of torture. The hell scenes tend to be in the context of, if they're not in Augustine's description, in a Last Judgment. So here's one where I want to draw your attention to, once again, the right-hand side of the screen, where you see the little souls once again being tortured. I have details of that in a moment. So something like this is painted on panel. It would have been installed in, say, the choir section inside a church, Santa Maria delle Angele in Florence, which belonged to the Camaldolce order, which was a type of a Benedictine complex, but later on was brought into a museum in Florence. But it's a very famous one by Fra Angelico. That's why I just included it here. If you want to fast forward to that, and there's again a scene of hell where you see the satanic figure devouring the little human souls, and usually with these gaping jaws. The horns, legs, so there. So that's how you know it's a depiction of hell and not purgatory. And I looked for really the most gruesome and obvious ones.
You did a good job.
Right, and that's just one. And like I said, there's a lot of sort of Dante going on in this. I don't want to get into that because that's not an accurate representation of what we're trying to explain today. But there are just some more of the scenes. We laugh at some of this today, right? Because it seems like so naive and so cartoonish. But it really is a horrific message, isn't it? When you think about it. And one of the scenes that I find funny, and I shouldn't laugh at it, in the upper right-hand corner there of this detail, well, let's see if you can figure out, what is the so-called perpetual torture there of that group in the...
They have
Okay, they're bound behind their backs, right? And what are they gazing upon? A feast that looks like, right, a Eucharistic set, but it's also like a meal. And if you actually look at what's on their plates, it's really not that appetizing.
Yeah.
But that idea that perhaps if you lived your life, you know, with say gluttony to the extreme, right? That's the way in which you would be tortured perpetually, is that a banquet would be laid before you, but you cannot reach it. Right? So that idea that your form of punishment would reflect the sin that you engaged in while alive. But as far as the rest, I mean, look, a bunch of people in a cauldron, and there's a little demonic figure, if you can go back for a second, heating up the flames, right? So those flames were meant to harm, compared to the flames that we see in images of purgatory.
The guy on the left with the little satchel kind of makes me think of like Judas and his bag of coins.
That's exactly what it was meant. You're weighed down by earthly possessions or greed or money. That's exactly what it was meant to be. Maybe his sin was a usury, right? And that was often the way in which it was depicted. Do we have time for more, or I mean, I could
No,
show
we
the six.
got 15 minutes.
All right, so I can show another one. So here's another missal, right? So as I said, those scenes are back to purgatory now, just so you get to understand the difference. So here's a beautiful, right? I tried to pick one that I could get good images of. So this was a missal of Eberhard von Greifenklau, who was a member of I think a Carthusian order of Benedictines, but his family was wealthy, so they were able to commission a book like this. Right? These are expensive. But here we have it in the context of the text, and the texts are the prayers, the pro defunctus, that would be said during the votive mass for the deceased. And when you have that image in the context of the prayers of the mass, what it does is to take the concept of praying for the deceased, but in the larger context of the Eucharist. So the idea of connecting the Eucharist with the prayers for the deceased, and that was important too. And you could zoom in on and you're going to see a very similar image to what we just saw before, right? Even though they're completely different works, they look very similar, which tells us that the tradition of representing purgatory was pretty standard at this time, right? So you see the little souls, in this case they're kneeling or genuflecting, an even more humble, modest, right, position that your body could be in. Some look directly up to the vision, and there we have the face of Christ with a halo, right? So God the Father, Jesus, Holy Spirit, some of them looking upward, some of them looking down. So you think, well, why would some be looking down as opposed to those looking up? Each person's time, right, would be different. So depending upon what state of purification you're in, some are almost ready to be taken up, some are still kind of mired down in their sinful ways, perhaps temptation, but now that's being purified from them. So that's why you see the different poses and positions of them. And the banderole that's held by them transcribe the Miserere me Deo secundum magnum misericordiam tuum. Don't please comment on my Latin, I haven't practiced it well. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your great mercy. And that comes from the psalm. So in other words, it shows you the prayer, right, of those people in there. So could we go back to one more? To that there. So I think we explained that before. So the calendar, right? So in a missal, what you would have is a calendar, the temporale, which is what the movable feasts throughout the church year, except for Christmas, but like the Advent season, Lenten season. And many of them would also have illustrations that would help whoever's using the missal find that passage, right? So once again, that's what this image of purgatory would help the priest who says using the missal to then celebrate the Mass to find it. And the purgatory would be in, I guess, the votive masses, right, after the ordinary. So its location in the books were pretty standard too.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can go on. So those are just, again, the details. We talked about this again. I went just forward in the other one. So that thing, here's another one that's dating to now early 16th century, so 1500, 1510. You can see it's very similar to the rest, right? So when I was looking up some of these early, say what I find, medieval traditions, they're appearing either in missals or personal prayer books, right? This is an actual book of hours, which would have been created as a personal prayer book for a wealthy person. And they would have included also the prayers for the deceased. So that's the difference between the missal and the prayer book. But you can see the image is very similar, right? That's my point of showing it, where you have here a big crowd of purgatory. Notice many of them looking upward in prayerful positions, kneeling, genuflecting, still surrounded by the flames. And you can see the angels in what looks like a little veil, lifting up the souls to heaven.
That have been purified.
Right, they've been purified, right? So as a result, right, they rise up from the rest.
Is that ink or tempera? Or?
These are painted on vellum, so like animal skin. This is all done by hand manuscript. So the ingredients they would use, some of it would be ink, some of it pigment. This is a very bad image. I couldn't get anything better, but what looks like sort of brownish yellow is actually gold.
Okay.
And then the other would be, depending upon where you lived in Europe, the ingredients for your different pigments would vary. Right, the gold and the color blue obviously are some of the most costly to use. So we know that this particular book of hours was made for somebody who was very wealthy enough to commission it. And it's at the morgue. So here's another one, a prayer book, right? And this is a little bit later, there you go, 1451, coming out of the tradition of Germany. Stefan Lochner was a very prolific artist working in the area like of Cologne. So you can see here in this initial O, which would begin certain prayers, the group. But now there's a slight change in this one. And if you go to the next, I think there's a detail closer up. Oh, maybe not. Hmm? Okay, so that's the size of it, by the way. The book that we're looking at this year. That's how small these prayer books are in some way. Some of them are like smaller than the size of a playing card, like in a deck of cards. I mean, when you think about the artisan who actually did that, it's really amazing. But somebody noticed it looks like there's a little creature pounding on the back of one of the figures, right? And some of them look like they're kind of trapped, where others are in different states, in their body language suggesting, and that just is meant to represent their journey, right, in this state of existence in purgatory. So some of them are still in that state where the impurities are being purified out, more heavily laden with the venial sins, perhaps, than some of the others.
So again, the angels coming to take those.
Exactly, right? So the angels as intercessors.
Evil, grabbing, yep. Okay.
And saving them too sometimes, right? I mean, there's that idea that you could be saved from the snares of temptation through prayers, right? That would also be a message communicated there. And there's the size of it. This is so famous, they actually made a facsimile of it that you could purchase. And that's what this is from a YouTube advertisement for that. But that's the size of it. I mean, that's why I figured it would be interesting to share that with you, but the actual scale. Because when they're blown up on a screen, you really have no idea how large they are or how small. So this one is a much more elaborate, this is from the Très Religieux of the Duke of Jean de Berry, one of the most famous manuscripts, Book of Hours, to come out of the 15th century, up there in the Flanders section, right? So it's an example of Flemish art where France, Belgium, the Netherlands come together today. And it is, again, one of the most famous of all manuscripts to even come out of the medieval tradition. So it's a full-page illustration in a private prayer book that gives us more information, I think, on the concept of purgatory. And what we have to realize, too, by this time of the 1400s, like the other examples, you know, Dante's influence would have spread far beyond, right, the area of Florence, where he was writing outside of Florence in exile. So you look at it, almost looks like a garden-like setting. You have figures reclining that look like they're being attacked by creatures in the lower corner, right, your lower right-hand corner. Then others look like they what do you call that when charcoal gets red? It's like burning, right? So some of it still flames of fire, but then it looks like it's like a stream of that going through some kind of an architectural structure. And I liken that to the kupol, right? The device that the gold is put into, heated up, the impurities are going to separate, and then out of that is going to come the purified gold. And if you look at the top, what happens? They start to rise up, and then there's some smoke, but that's not bad because those are the little souls that are going up to heaven, being received by the angels. Meanwhile, you have a body of water, which look like people are drowning, but they're not. They're looking upward, and that body of water is also meant to signify purification, right? And you think of water baptism and so on. It symbolizes all those levels associated with purifying one's soul. And there's one figure who is being lifted up by the angel. And the angel's checking, is she going upward? Yes. If you look at it, it's kind of cute. I have a detail to show you. Others are reclining on what looks like sort of a rocky, cliffy hill. And I suspect that might be direct influence from Dante's version of Purgatory with the 7 terraces and the mountain. And we can talk more about that next time. I don't want to use that to explain the doctrine here, but that might be reflecting the impact of Dante's work in the illustrations. But they're laying down, right? They're connected to the ground, which is interesting too. You could advance forward, and there's a D. So here you see the upper section, right? So the angels cradling the little souls in prayerful positions, bringing them upward to heaven, and then from the smoke too, you see some of them being assisted or in prayerful positions, rising upward. So that's how we know they're not being tortured or consumed or anything like that.
That's a beautiful image of being purified and taken up into
The
heaven.
concept, right? I mean, that's why I chose this one. I thought this would be great to explain it. And then if you go down to the bottom level, here, right, in the lower corner, you see this one figure. Notice her face is turned away. And the others, who seem to be emerging out of the ground, are looking upward, right? And that's the difference. So these creatures in the lower right-hand corner have been variously identified. Some say they look like crocodiles. Others say they're just sort of generic types of creatures associated with evil. Right? I mean, in the Middle Ages, there was a book of beasts called a bestiary, and the crocodile was included in that. And the crocodile was associated with evil. And the crocodile, because it has this huge gaping jaw with fangs, was sometimes used as an image, as a portal into hell. The crocodiles here don't represent hell, but perhaps represent the evil behind temptation, where she's still succumbing to that, right? In other words, being purified of all of that, where the others have already gone through that process, if needed, and are looking upward. So that's why you see in some scenes of Purgatory, you might see a figure that looks like it's being tortured, but it's not meant to be a torture of hell, but rather perhaps still holding on to whatever that sinful way was.
Like the little red coming down her arm, which is by her eyes.
That's her hair.
Oh, is it her hair?
Yeah, it's like it's gently cascading down. Yeah,
it's like her crying blood for her.
Oh, well, yeah, I can see why that. Yeah, it's just the way.
So it's hair.
Yeah, it looks like her golden hair just cascading over her arm like that.
Good, less painful.
Yeah, right. But there's also another, and then you can see here's one later than the Very Rich Hours of Jean-Luc de Beret. Copies almost the same thing, right? So then you have like something that's in place that other manuscript illustrators are going to see, and then they will use that same. So you see a change, right, in the High Middle Ages. From what we saw earlier, that would have been part of a missal, now to, say, a more complex vision of Purgatory, but you still have that sort of body or sea of little figures as though it's like they're ambers or whatever. And then the flames, we don't have the smoke, but we have the little souls being cradled by the angels, taking them upward in the body of water. In one case, there's a figure impaled, which I think is interesting because it's still in a prayerful position. I'm not quite sure what that is meant to represent, but you still have then the crocodiles sort of nibbling at the body and in a position with the arms over the head. Now, I wonder too if that had something to do with Dante's version. So if you go to the next slide, I think what I put in here. So we'll save this for part 2, but then the reason I want to address this is because some of what appears in that section on Purgatory in terms of the people that Dante and Beatrice, encounter, perhaps has it gone over into images? I guess that's what I'm trying to say, which is not necessarily part of the Catholic belief, but rather a tradition of illustrating the concept of Purgatory. So I want to just make sure that we can separate the two. So we can stop there for now and pick up with that. Maybe I'll just explain a little bit. I don't want to get too much into Dante's Divine Comedy, but if it impacts the art, I'll just try to explain that difference. And then the rest of what's here for next time will be after the Counter-Reformation, right? So there's a change in the way Purgatory is going to be represented. And generally, you're going to see these enormous paintings right above the high altar behind the tabernacle because of reinforcing the connection with the Mass and the prayers for the deceased. So that becomes and some beautiful works that we'll see next time. So we could end it there.
Okay.
I think it's a good stopping point.
Yep, thank you, Lisa. So if you didn't get all of that, you're welcome to go on YouTube, find this video, right, Leo? And that way you can watch it at your own pace, and you can stop and go back and so forth.
What will it be tagged under to find it?
Oh, may give us the link.
Purgatory?
Purgatory Part